Jessica Raymond was hurriedly leaving her office, located in a rough area of New York City. The clock showed late evening, and the streetlights were growing dimmer. The bustling city she was accustomed to during the day had now given way to darkness and silence. The noise of cars and voices had mostly vanished, leaving the streets empty and ominous. Jessica tried to walk quickly, her footsteps echoing off the walls of the surrounding buildings. She tried to avoid looking at her surroundings, her mind racing about how much more there was to do and how badly she wanted to get home. The office was only a few blocks from the subway station, but each step felt long and exhausting. As she approached the station, her keen eye noticed something strange. There was an unusual lack of activity around the station. Normally, people were always around, but now the silence was almost absolute. Jessica tried to shake off her unease and focus on getting to the subway as quickly as possible so she could head home. Descending the stairs into the subway, Jessica glanced around. At the bottom, she was greeted by the muted hum of trains and the dim light of the bulbs. This underground world always seemed a bit eerie to her, especially late at night. The camera captures her face gradually filling with worry as she realizes the station is empty. As if from around a corner, the echo of her footsteps starts to resonate in the silence. Jessica tries to stay calm, but the sense of isolation and insecurity intensifies. One of the light bulbs begins to flicker, adding to the anxious atmosphere of the underground. She quickens her pace, heading towards the platform, hoping that the next train is close by. Each of Jessica's steps becomes more cautious. Her gaze skims the walls and around her, searching for any sign of activity. This sense of emptiness and silence only heightens her fear, and she feels her heart pounding in her chest. The camera captures every movement and expression, emphasizing her growing anxiety in this gloomy and deserted place. What started as an ordinary workday evening had now taken on an unexpected and unsettling tone. Jessica hopes she will soon be able to leave this place and head home, unaware that her journey is only beginning. Jessica Raymond, feeling a slight unease, continued her descent down the stairs leading to the subway. Each step down plunged her further into darkness, which grew thicker, while the dim neon lights barely illuminated her path. These muted lights flickered, casting long shadows, and in their light, the surrounding darkness seemed even more oppressive and lifeless. When Jessica reached the platform, she noticed it was almost empty. In the distance, only one or two scattered passengers were visible, and even their conversations were muffled by the underground surroundings. The rumble of the trains, like white noise, resonated in the air, creating a sense of endless space. This noise was both soothing and irritating, as if a reminder that the escape from this dismal environment was still far off. Jessica tried to remain as attentive as possible. Every movement she made was cautious and deliberate. She avoided sudden turns and surprises. The platform seemed long and endless, its dark corners and shabby walls creating an atmosphere of mounting fear. Her thoughts swirled around the anxious feeling she had experienced when she noticed the station was empty. Her gaze frequently slid over the line of waiting trains, her hands tightly gripping her bag as if it might be her last line of defense. The camera captures her worried face as she notices that not all the lights on the platform are working, with some flickering in sync with her growing tension. The flickering light created an illusion of movement, only heightening her sense of anxiety. Every echo of her footsteps in the empty subway space amplified the feeling of isolation. From time to time, her gaze returned to the darkness surrounding the station, and she anxiously looked around, trying to ignore the sounds that seemed increasingly ominous. The cold air in the underground seeped into her clothing, bringing with it an unpleasant chill. The subway environment was cold and unwelcoming. Jessica tried to stay focused and not let fear overtake her, even though she felt her nervousness growing with each passing minute. The platform she crossed seemed like a maze, and with each step, her confidence that her wait for the train would be prolonged became more justified. Every sound, whether the mechanical creaking of the rails or distant whispers that might be coming from the shadows, intensified her fear. The camera emphasizes her anxious state, capturing each movement and change in her expression as she struggles to cope with the rising sense of unease. The underground world, engulfed in silence and anticipation, became increasingly tense and unpredictable for Jessica, reminding her that these dark labyrinths conceal numerous unknowns and potential dangers. After Jessica had waited for her train and settled into a vacant car, she attempted to relax. The long workday had left her exhausted. and she hoped the train ride would be a smooth trip home. The empty car provided a brief moment of peace, allowing her to unwind and rest. However, a sudden chill of fear crept down her spine, a premonition of something unpleasant to come. When the train arrived at the next station, Jessica noticed three men standing on the platform. They were dressed in dark jackets and appeared wary. Their behavior and the way they interacted with each other struck her as suspicious. The men stood close to the door of the car, and one of them shot her a glance that she couldn't ignore. It was a fleeting look, but intense enough to stir an inner sense of unease in Jessica. As the train doors opened, the men entered slowly. Jessica felt her anxiety rise. She observed their movements, they followed her but made an effort not to draw attention. Each step they took seemed directed at her, though they pretended to simply look for a place to sit. The camera captures her anxious face as she watches them with concern, trying to gauge their intentions. Once the train started moving again, Jessica tried to remain calm, but her fear intensified. The men didn't seem like random passengers. They kept their distance, but their constant presence and scrutinizing glances created a sense of threat. Jessica noticed them exchanging looks and subtle gestures, which only heightened her anxiety. The camera focuses on her tense expression and rapid breathing as she realizes that these men might pose a danger. When the train reached the next station and Jessica disembarked, her fears were confirmed. The men followed her onto the platform. This confirmed her suspicions. They were trailing her. The camera captures her tense expression as she quickly scans her surroundings, her internal monologue a whisper of anxiety. She tries to figure out what to do next, her thoughts revolving around how to evade the potential threat. At this moment, Jessica decides to quicken her pace and leave the platform swiftly, hoping to avoid their attention. Her eyes search for a safe place, and her heart races faster. The camera highlights her anxiety and caution, capturing every movement and expression in this tense moment. Every sound and motion around her seems like a potential threat, and she actively assesses her environment. This first warning sign from the men following her serves as a clear indication to Jessica that she needs to be extremely cautious to avoid a potential threat. Trying to keep her composure, she continues to move, hoping that her vigilance and desire to avoid conflict will help her navigate this dangerous and unpredictable situation. After Jessica exited the train and noticed that the men were following her, her anxiety reached a new level. The platform she had arrived at was narrow and poorly lit, amplifying her fear. Jessica tried to move confidently, but every sound she heard seemed ominous. The men on the platform also began to speed up. Their movements became more deliberate, and Jessica noticed they were getting closer and closer. Their behavior became even more assertive. They didn't try to hide their intentions but simply followed her, creating a threatening atmosphere. In an attempt to shake off her pursuers, Jessica decided to take more decisive action. She turned into one of the long, narrow corridors leading to the street. The camera captures her increasingly fast and tense steps as she notices that the men are not falling behind. The men, it seemed, were not in a hurry and moved with an unsettling calmness, which only intensified her fear. Jessica, trying to keep her distance, quickened her pace and turned a corner, hoping it would help her evade them. However, when she glanced back, she saw that they were not only following her but seemed to be closing the distance. Her heart began to pound in her chest from fear, and she felt that time was running out. Jessica decided she needed to act quickly and decisively. Trying to maintain her composure, she quickened her pace again, passing by closed shops and semi-empty spaces. Each of her steps echoed off the walls, creating the feeling that her pursuers were getting closer. The camera emphasizes her growing tension, capturing her worried face and warm breath in the cold air of the underground space. Her fear increases with every step as she realizes her pursuers are almost upon her. Jessica strives to keep her mind clear despite the mounting panic and resolves that her next goal is to exit the subway as quickly as possible and find a safe place. At this moment, the danger becomes evident, and Jessica realizes that her pursuers are not only following her but are intent on making her feel vulnerable. The camera captures this climactic moment as Jessica strives to find an exit in safety, feeling that the situation is becoming increasingly critical. Overcome with fear, Jessica quickly left the underground corridors of the subway and made her way to the exit, hoping she could evade her pursuers. Her legs felt like lead, and each movement required effort. She knew her next goal was to cross the bridge leading to the parking lot where she had left her car. However, the bridge was almost empty and poorly lit, adding an extra layer of anxiety. When she reached the bridge, her steps became even more cautious. The camera captures her worried face and rapidly shifting gaze as she notices the flickering light and impenetrable darkness around her. With each passing second, she felt her fear intensify and her pulse quicken. The bridge was long, and her fear that the men might reappear from the shadows only grew stronger. Jessica quickened her pace, trying to ignore the rustling sounds and echoes that created additional shadows and noises. She peered into the darkness, striving to stay focused and vigilant. The camera shows her tense body and her occasional glances over her shoulder to ensure that the men are still not closing in. At that moment, she notices several dark figures on the bridge moving toward her. This fact heightens her panic, and Jessica begins to run, feeling that her pursuers might be very close. The camera captures her frantic, panicked run, emphasizing her growing fear and anxiety. As she reaches the middle of the bridge, her heart feels like it might burst from her chest. She senses that her pursuers could be nearing. Every sound, whether the creaking of metal or the wind, seems like a threat. Jessica tries to ignore the fear and focus on her ultimate goal, the car waiting for her in the parking lot at the end of the bridge. The bridge becomes a symbol of her last hope for safety. The camera highlights her overcoming fear and determination as she reaches the end of the bridge, her movements becoming increasingly swift and resolute. Each step on the bridge feels like a battle against the mounting threat, but the thought of her car being close keeps her going. When Jessica reaches the end of the bridge and sees the parking lot, her sense of relief is mixed with a new wave of fear as she realizes she still has to get to her car and secure her safety. The camera captures her tired but determined face as she prepares for the next stage of her perilous journey. When Jessica finally reached the parking lot, her fear reached its peak. Her legs were weary from the long journey, and she could almost see her car when she suddenly noticed that the men who had been following her were in the parking lot. Their figures stood out against the dim light filtering through the dim street lamps. Her shock was instantaneous. Jessica froze, her heart pounding, and she felt fear envelop her. The men stood just a few meters from her car, their postures and movements menacing. One of them, noticing her approach, began to move slowly toward her, while the other two simply watched, creating an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Jessica, her face twisted in panic, quickly realized that the situation was critical. Her mind raced with thoughts of what to do to protect herself. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her car keys, clutching them in her hand. The camera focuses on her trembling fingers gripping the keys, which she intends to use as a weapon. Her face is contorted with fear, and her eyes are filled with anxiety. The men, noticing her panic, start moving faster. One of them, wearing dark glasses and a scowling expression, raises his hand as if to say or do something. This only heightens her fear. Jessica frantically scans for a way to safety, but all she sees are the approaching figures and the proximity of her car, which now seems like an insurmountable obstacle. With each step the men take, her panic increases. The camera captures her hands trembling more violently and her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. She hides the keys in her fist, preparing to use them if attacked, and her gaze becomes even more wary and tense. At this moment, Jessica realizes that her safety is at risk, and every choice and action she takes could be crucial. The camera continues to capture her exhausted and anxious face, documenting the rising sense of panic and fear that has overtaken her as she stands on the brink between the possibility of escape and the real threat she faces. Jessica, trying to calm her panicked breathing, finds herself in the car, overwhelmed with panic and anxiety. Her fingers tremble as she struggles to insert the key into the ignition, her thoughts focused solely on one goal: locking the doors and protecting herself from the threat. The men, who have now approached her vehicle, begin pounding on the windows and shouting. Their loud and threatening cries only heighten her fear. When Jessica finally manages to start the car, her hands are still shaking from the tension. The camera captures her face, filled with fear and stress. She quickly presses the lock button, and the doors click shut, giving her a small sense of relief. But this relief is short-lived. The men continue their attempts to get inside. One of the men, who appears particularly aggressive, pounds his fist on the window, and the glass cracks from the impact. His face is filled with rage and contempt, and this sight only intensifies Jessica's fear. She watches his anger and frustration grow as he realizes he cannot enter the car. Her fear reaches its peak, and she understands that her next actions could be critical to her safety. Jessica tries to ignore the noise and panic, focusing on remaining calm. The camera shows her body tensing from fear and stress as she keeps her eyes on her pursuers through the side mirrors. She does everything she can to maintain control of the situation, her hands still trembling as she attempts to shift gears and turn on the ignition. Seeing that Jessica has locked the doors, the men escalate their actions, hitting the windows, shouting threats, and trying to scare her. The camera captures their actions, highlighting the aggression and tension in their behavior. Jessica, trying to stay composed, navigates her way to safety, understanding that her chances of escape depend on her ability to act decisively. She turns the ignition key, and the sound of the engine begins to cut through the noise and shouting. The camera captures her anxious expression as she eagerly awaits the moment she can leave this dangerous place. Jessica realizes that despite locking the doors and trying to protect herself, her safety is still at risk, and every moment becomes crucial for her survival. When Jessica had confidently locked all the doors, she couldn't shake the feeling that her safety was still at risk. The men who continued to bang on the windows and yell created a sense that their efforts might soon break through her defenses. Jessica's heart pounded with fear, but she decided to use her last line of defense, the alarm. Her hands trembled as she tried to find the button on the alarm control panel. Her eyes nervously darted across the windshield, where the men continued to cause a commotion. The camera captures each of her movements, her tense face, shaking fingers, and the panicked expression reflecting her fear and determination. Jessica activated the alarm, hoping the loud sound would scare off the pursuers. When the alarm went off, its piercing, loud noise shattered the night's silence. At first, the sound seemed too loud to Jessica, and the unpleasant screeching hurt her ears. The camera captures her face contorting with the realization that this was her only chance for salvation. The men, initially startled by the sudden noise, immediately began to panic. Their confidence and aggression were replaced by confusion and fear. One of the men, who had just attempted to break a window, recoiled in shock from the loud sound. His face twisted in shock as he nervously looked around, trying to understand what was happening. The other two men also retreated, their actions becoming more chaotic. They shouted over each other, their cries lost in the overall cacophony of the alarm. Seeing the men begin to back away, Jessica felt her fear gradually subside. The camera captures her face relaxing from its initial tension as she realizes that the alarm has indeed worked. Her hands were still trembling, but hope appeared in her eyes as she saw the men starting to move away from her car. The alarm continued to emit its loud, piercing sound, creating a barrier between Jessica and her pursuers. This noise barrier gave her a chance to catch her breath and consider her next steps. The camera captures her deep breaths and the look of relief on her face, though fear still lingers in her eyes. Jessica kept watching as the men gradually left, but her vigilance did not wane. She understood that despite the alarm's effectiveness, her situation still required attentiveness and caution. The camera shows her expression shifting from panic to determination as she realizes that now is the time to act to fully ensure her safety and security. As the men finally move away from her car, Jessica remains seated inside, trembling from fear and tension. The blare of the alarm continues to fill the parking lot, but its impact starts to diminish as the pursuers disappear into the cover of night. Jessica knows it's crucial to ensure that the threat has fully passed before proceeding further. At first, she slowly lowers her hand, still tightly gripping the keys. The camera captures her tense movements and thoughtful gaze as she cautiously lifts her head and peeks out of the window. Jessica's trembling hands glide over the dashboard as she checks for any signs of her pursuers. With every movement, she feels a growing sense of relief, but her vigilance remains steadfast. She scans the parking lot from different angles, paying close attention to every sound and movement. The camera focuses on her shifting gaze over empty parking spots and corners where her pursuers might be hiding. After not spotting any movement, Jessica cautiously lowers the window, straining to hear any lingering sounds. The silence becomes her ally, and she listens intently for any rustles or footsteps, trying to ensure that the danger has passed. The camera emphasizes her worried face as she concentrates on each sound, assessing how safe it is to exit the car. Once she is certain that the men have completely left, Jessica allows herself to relax, albeit with difficulty. She takes a deep breath to calm her breathing and starts to check if everything is all right with her car. The camera captures her trembling hands as she inspects the locks, handles, and windows to ensure they are undamaged and not tampered with. Realizing that she cannot stay in the parking lot for too long, Jessica decides she needs to act. She slowly shifts into drive mode to leave the dangerous location. The camera shows her cautiously looking around before signaling and pulling out of the parking lot, her movements becoming more confident even though fear has not entirely dissipated. This moment of checking and confirming safety is critical for Jessica, as it allows her to recognize that despite the danger she faced, she managed to maintain her composure and resolve. The camera highlights her determined face as she begins to drive towards the exit of the parking lot, preparing to continue her safe journey home. As Jessica finally leaves the parking lot, her heart is still racing from the stress she has just experienced. The blaring sound of the alarm gradually fades as she distances herself from the dangerous scene. Relief mingles with residual fear, and Jessica begins to grasp the full extent of what has transpired. Driving past empty streets and the autumnal cityscape, her thoughts drift back to the incident. The camera captures her tense face and deeply contemplative gaze as she realizes how close she came to becoming a victim. Her breathing steadies, but the tension remains evident in her posture and movements. At a traffic light, Jessica glances in the rearview mirror and sees her reflection, distorted by exhaustion and fear. Her eyes reveal shock and the realization of how narrowly she avoided a worse outcome. She rubs her forehead, struggling to process the gravity of the situation. As Jessica continues toward home, her emotions oscillate between shock, anxiety, and gratitude for having survived. The camera shows her trying to focus on the road despite her inner turmoil. She makes efforts to calm herself, but her nerves remain on edge. Upon arriving home, Jessica feels her body slowly start to relax, but the shock of the night's events has not entirely worn off. She parks the car and checks once more to ensure no one is following her. The camera captures her cautious actions and anxious expression as she exits the vehicle and heads toward her door. Jessica realizes that her life has changed in one night. The camera focuses on her emotional state as she enters her home and closes the door behind her. Inside, she begins to understand the significance of having escaped the attack. This realization is both a shock and a lesson, and Jessica starts to consider how to better prepare for potential threats in the future. Her internal monologue, captured by the camera, underscores her understanding of the importance of self-defense and taking measures to enhance her safety. Her feelings are a blend of fear and determination, and she begins to recognize that this night has left an indelible mark on her life. After Jessica closes the door behind her and regains her composure, her mind starts to acknowledge that the incident was not just a random occurrence but a real threat to her life. Inside the house, her fear gradually turns into determination as she realizes that she needs to take action to ensure her safety and prevent any recurrence of such situations. Struggling to steady her trembling hands, Jessica moves towards the phone. The camera captures her face, still marked by anxiety and stress, as she dials the emergency services number. Her voice quivers, and her words come out haltingly, but she tries to speak clearly and coherently to report what happened. "Hello, I just encountered a group of men who were following me. I'm home now, but they might still be nearby. I need help," Jessica says, her voice breaking with nervous breaths. The camera captures her anxious expression as she listens attentively to the operator's response, trying to calm herself and gather her thoughts. The operator on the other end of the line asks for clarification about her location and details of the incident. Jessica answers the questions, her voice becoming clearer as she begins to describe what happened. She explains how the men followed her from the subway, how she used the alarm to scare them off, and that they eventually left the parking lot. "I'm still not sure they've completely gone," Jessica adds. "I'm afraid to leave the house, and I don't know what to do next." The camera shows her expressions and movements as she conveys her confusion and fear, discussing potential next steps and recommendations with the operator. The operator advises Jessica to stay in a safe place until the police arrive and to not open the door to anyone except official law enforcement personnel. Jessica nods in agreement, her eyes full of anxiety and determination to follow the instructions. As Jessica sat in her home, listening to the silence outside the window, her thoughts continually returned to what had happened. The moments of the incident replayed in her mind over and over, and every creak and rustle outside seemed like a potential threat. Jessica's nerves were on edge, and every sound made her flinch. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to the piercing sounds of sirens cutting through the night's silence and the flashing lights visible through the window. Jessica's heart raced again, but this time it was not from fear but from relief. The police had finally arrived, and it was like a breath of fresh air in her tense night. Jessica, with fear and hope in her eyes, cautiously opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Her hands were still shaking from stress, and every movement seemed delayed. The camera captures her anxious face and tense posture as she watches the police cars, their lights flashing and sirens blaring, pull up to her home. The officers, emerging from the horizon of her nightmares, begin to get out of their vehicles. The officers greet her with polite insistence and ask Jessica to explain what happened. Overcoming the tremor in her voice, Jessica begins to describe the incident, her words mixed with notes of exhaustion and relief. The camera captures every word and every movement, as the police listen attentively to her account, taking notes and exchanging glances. One of the officers, looking confident and professional, asks Jessica questions about the details of the incident, requesting descriptions of the suspects, their actions, and possible motives. As the officers begin to inspect the parking lot and surrounding area, Jessica stays nearby, ready to provide any additional information. The camera shows her nervous anticipation and tension as the officers carefully examine the scene, checking for any potential evidence and discussing amongst themselves how best to proceed with the investigation. One of the officers approaches Jessica with a serious expression and informs her that they have not found any obvious evidence at the scene. However, they plan to patrol the area to try to locate any traces of the suspects. Jessica gives a look of gratitude, her eyes reflecting a mix of relief and concern. The camera captures her relieved but still worried face as she realizes that the police's actions could play a crucial role in preventing further threats and restoring her peace of mind. After the police completed their inspection of the parking lot, the officers began collecting evidence and analyzing the situation. One of the officers, Sergeant Hunt, approached Jessica to discuss the details of the incident and gather additional statements. The camera captures Sergeant Hunt's polite and professional demeanor as he interacts with Jessica, whose nervous state and expression contrast with his confident behavior. "Could you tell me again what exactly happened?" Sergeant Hunt asks, taking notes in a notebook. His voice sounds calm and assured, which helps to soothe Jessica somewhat. She tries to recount the events in order, starting from when she first noticed the three men in the subway and ending with how she used the alarm system to protect herself. Sergeant Hunt listens attentively to Jessica, asking clarifying questions to get a full picture of the incident. He inquires about the appearance of the men, their behavior, and whether she has any guesses as to why they might have been following her. Jessica describes them as three men in dark clothing, who she suspects might have been under the influence of drugs or simply behaving aggressively and persistently. While one officer takes Jessica's statement, another begins inspecting the parking lot. He looks for any possible evidence, examining the area for discarded items, traces, or damage that could provide additional clues about what happened. The camera captures the officers as they check the places where Jessica might have been and conduct a thorough investigation, documenting each action they take. After the police gather the primary evidence and ask all necessary questions, they begin discussing their plan for further action. Sergeant Hunt informs Jessica that they will continue to patrol the area and attempt to locate the suspects. He also notes that if she comes across any new details or notices anything suspicious, she should immediately report it to the police. The camera captures Jessica nodding with gratitude and relief. She feels that the police's actions have helped her feel more secure, although her fear has not entirely dissipated. Sergeant Hunt reassures her that they will do everything possible to ensure her safety and resolve the situation. As the police prepare to leave, Jessica thanks them once more for their help. The camera captures her expression of gratitude and relief, as well as her determination to stay vigilant. The police depart, and Jessica returns to her home, still feeling the stress of the incident but also confident that she has done everything possible to protect herself and ensure her safety. Inside the house, the camera captures Jessica checking the doors and windows once again, making sure everything is securely locked. This ritual of checking becomes a new habit for her, symbolizing her altered reality and awareness that her life has changed due to the incident. Jessica understands that safety now requires constant attention, and she is prepared to do whatever it takes to feel secure in her own home. After the police left, Jessica was alone in her home. The room was bathed in semi-darkness, illuminated only by a lamp on the table and the dim light of street lamps filtering through the window. The camera captures Jessica sitting in a chair, her legs curled beneath her, and her hands clenched tightly into fists. Her face reflects a mix of fear, exhaustion, and deep contemplation. Inside her, a storm of emotions rages. She replayed the events of the evening over and over in her mind, reliving every detail and realizing how close she had come to becoming a victim. The camera captures her tense expression and deep breaths as she tries to calm herself and process what happened. Every sound and shadow in the room reminds her of the recent fear. And she struggles with a growing sense of anxiety. On the wall beside her hangs a calendar, and the camera focuses on the current date, which stands out as a reminder that this day marked a turning point in her life. Jessica looks at the calendar, and her thoughts delve into the importance of remaining calm and taking steps to protect herself. Her thoughts return to the night when she last felt safe, and she begins to realize that her life will never be the same. Images of her fear and tension resurface in her mind, and she wonders how she will cope with the ongoing feeling of anxiety and unease. The camera captures Jessica picking up a cup of tea, trying to relax, but her hands still tremble with nervousness. With each passing minute, her fear gradually transforms into determination. Jessica realizes she needs to take steps to strengthen her sense of security and regain her confidence. She decides to consult with security specialists and start self-defense classes to be prepared for any future situations. The camera captures her resolute face as she acknowledges that, despite the frightening nature of the incident, it has been an important lesson for her. Jessica writes in her notebook her thoughts and plans, making notes about the steps she needs to take to enhance her safety. She plans to implement additional security measures in her home, such as new locks, surveillance systems, and improved lighting, and she also considers how she can be more vigilant in her daily life. The camera shows her hands writing notes and the expression of determination on her face as she realizes she has control over her safety. In the silence and solitude, Jessica understands that she faces a long road to regain her confidence and normalize her life. The camera captures her determined expression as she looks at her notes and realizes that this incident, though terrifying, has been a crucial lesson for her. She resolves not to let fear control her life. With each step, she begins to restore her calm and confidence. Jessica understands that despite the fear she has experienced, she possesses the inner strength and resolve to handle the aftermath of the incident. The camera shows her as she rises from the chair and starts preparing for a new phase of her life, filled with determination and plans to enhance her security. The next day, Jessica decides to take a significant step towards enhancing her safety. She realizes that the incident from the night before has given her not only fear but also a valuable understanding of the importance of being prepared for potential threats. The camera captures her awakening with renewed determination and purpose. Jessica seeks advice from security specialists. The camera shows her visiting a local self-defense center, where she attends an introductory class. The self-defense instructor explains fundamental techniques and principles that will help her feel more confident and secure. During the session, Jessica learns various defense methods, from simple maneuvers to the use of specialized equipment. The camera captures her active participation, persistence, and eagerness to acquire new skills. She engages in practical exercises and demonstrates her successful application of the techniques she has learned. Upon completing the class, Jessica receives a certificate of completion and feels a sense of accomplishment from the knowledge gained. The camera focuses on her smile and newfound confidence as she leaves the center, understanding that her determination and actions will help her regain a sense of security. On her way home, Jessica stops at a store to purchase additional security measures for her house. The camera shows her carefully selecting locks, alarm systems, and other devices designed to enhance her protection. Jessica returns home, and the camera captures her installing the new equipment, testing its functionality, and making final adjustments to her security system. This act becomes a personal affirmation of her readiness for the future. With each step she takes to improve her safety, Jessica acknowledges that the incident has changed her life but has also given her the strength and resolve not only to protect herself but also to alert others about the importance of personal security. The camera highlights her determined face and calm demeanor as she reflects on her achievements. Ready to face new challenges with confidence and vigilance in her everyday life.